one of the things that I puzzled out a long while back and tried to adhere to the best of my ability was driven by exactly the concern that you're expressing, because I realized that the instinct for meaning is a genuine instinct, and it underlies even our attention. It's unbelievably deep. It's the deepest thing about us. Okay, but what about
the search for meaning? That's that, or
the experience
meaning itself.
and the search.
Okay.
Well, I would say both of those. Both of those are they're somewhat independent, because the search for meaning is very motivating, but the experience of meaning is something in and of itself. We talked about that in relationship to the night sky, for example.
Right.
So okay, but your objection was, well, what if that meaning instinct goes wrong? It's like, yeah, what if? What if? Okay, how do you make it go wrong? Lie and see what happens. Because you'll pathologize that instinct, and then you're lost. So if you understand that, there isn't anything more frightening than understanding that. Because your stability as an entity, as a soul, is dependent on your relationship with that instinct for meaning. And if you pathologize that with deceit, you will find yourself in the hands of things that you do not want to be in the hands of. Put it that way.
But
so if you're...
The argument today is, there is no truth. Whose truth? It's my truth. It's your truth. I think what you're saying is you find meaning in truth. And if you're lying about something, then that's the absence of truth. But
well, if you tell the truth to the best of your ability, then you can trust your instincts to some degree, to the greatest degree that you're capable of, and then that can help orient you in the world properly. You can rely on your instincts if you don't pathologize the information that you're feeding yourself. So, if you want to live in harmony with yourself, which you would assume to be somewhat desirable rather than
right.
a hellish disharmony, then don't feed yourself what's indigestible, and certainly don't warp the world around you with deceit you know to be deceitful. It's extraordinarily damaging and dangerous. Well, because I realized that the instinct for meaning could become pathologized. That's what made me obsessed to begin with about the spoken word, with free speech, for example. You were also talking about what orients us in the middle. Well, the thing about the middle is where the middle is shifts, because the environment around us shifts, the natural world shifts, the social world shifts, and so that middle moves on us. And so what we do is we talk to each other, which is a form of thinking. Thinking is internalized speech. So the dialogue we're having is thought. If I'm thinking, I just have that dialogue in my head by myself. It's still a dialogue between two viewpoints. So we orient ourselves with untrammeled, honest speech in a constant search to find that optimal middle ground. But it always moves. So we are destined in some sense to continually communicate about where we should be. That's for sure. But the idea that there's a desirable middle that we can attain through dialogue, well, that's a presupposition of Western individualism. There is an assault on that idea. So if you buy the idea that our institutions are basically predicated on tyrannical power, so that's the basis for institutional organization, is power. Then you buy the argument that the dialogue between institutions is nothing but the expression of that power. There are no individuals, and there's no space for rational negotiation. And that case is being made constantly, particularly by radicals on the left. It is fundamentally anti-individual. And there is no room in that system for free speech itself. It's not like it's anti-free speech. That's a misconception. Something isn't anti-free speech if it has no room whatsoever for the concept of free speech. That's a much deeper criticism. And that's part of what's driving this identity politics movement. It's an assault on the idea of the individual word, the word itself. It's an assault on the idea of the redemptive power of the word itself. There's no individuals, there's no rational discourse, there's no possibility of meeting in the middle. There's no middle. There's just a territory defined by struggles for power between groups. That's why it's okay not to invite someone who disagrees with you. They don't disagree with you. They represent a different power structure. And you might think you have an opinion, but you don't. You're merely mouthing the platitudes of your social structure. You're not there as an individual, not from that perspective. This is a much more radical critique than people generally realize. It goes all the way to the bottom. In my writings and my lectures, I've tried to encourage people to deal with malevolence at the level of the individual. Because when you start dealing with it in others, there's a big risk in that. It's like clean up your own house, which is right. I mean, right. I've been parodied for that. So, well, look at all the social problems in the world, and Dr. Peterson is telling the oppressed to clean up their rooms. It's like, how is that going to solve anything? It's, well, first of all, have you tried it? Actually, it's not that bloody easy to clean up your room.
Right.
And so
it's harder. It's much easier to clean somebody else's room.
Yes, or it's certainly a lot easier to point to the mess in someone else's room.
Yes.
And you know, there's such a danger. There's such a danger in that, and it's so attractive, right, to identify, to localize malevolence externally. It's so attractive because, first of all, it lets you off the hook, and that's a relief. And second, if you've identified malevolence, there's nothing you can do to what is malevolent that's unjustifiable, and so your worst impulses have free reign. Because especially if you can also add to that a good cause. You say, well, this is in the service of the eventual utopia. It's like, well, now you have carte blanche for your worst motivations, and that's very, very dangerous. And so I always think that it's better to stick to the psychological.
How do you get people to recognize and then have the courage to stand? You've taken a beating. Nobody wants to do that. Why is that worth it, and how do you get there?
Well, I think it's worth it because I believe the alternative is worse. I mean, that's why I think it's worth it. I think it's a decision that you make to stay silent when you have something to say. You know, you don't know what it is within you that requires your voice. Right? Because you feel, I have something to say. It's like, well, where does that come from exactly, that feeling that you have something to say? You're disgruntled at work and you're choking on your own bile because the situation is not just in your estimation. You're dying to say something, but you won't. Well, you'll die if you don't say it. Maybe it's a death of 1,000 cuts. I don't like deferred punishment. I'd rather take it now and keep the future clean, which is why I encourage people to have the fights now. Not to hide things in the fog for later, because they grow and metastasize. It's better to confront what you need to confront when it's small and when you have some possibility of victory. We have software online at a site called selfauthoring.com that helps people write an autobiography. And so they go through their lives, breaking their lives into epochs and identifying the most emotionally and practically significant events and detailing them. And that's all in an attempt to help people forget and to let go of uncertainty and threat and anxiety and, well, the whole panoply of negative emotions that their life memories might otherwise be contaminated with. And so you do that in therapy continually with people when you're talking about their past. And it isn't catharsis. The Freudians believed, for example, that if someone had a traumatic experience and then they were able to express the emotion that was associated with that experience, that would be curative. But it doesn't look like it's the expression of the emotion. It looks like it's the extraction of the significance of the event.
Don't underestimate the power of truth. There's nothing more powerful. Now, in order to speak what you might regard as the truth, you have to let go of the outcome. You have to think, all right, I'm going to say what I think, stupid as I am, biased as I am, ignorant as I am. I'm going to state what I think as clearly as I can, and I'm going to live with the consequences no matter what they are. That's an element of faith. The idea is that nothing brings a better world into being than the stated truth. Now you might have to pay a price for that, but that's fine. You're going to pay a price for every bloody thing you do and everything you don't do. You don't get to choose to not pay a price. You get to choose which poison you're going to take. That's it. So if you're going to stand up for something, stand up for your truth. It'll shape you, because people will respond and object and tell you why you're a fool and a biased moron and why you're ignorant. And then if you listen to them, you'll be just that much less like that the next time you say something. And if you do that for 5 years, you'll be so damn tough and articulate and able to communicate and withstand pressure that you won't even recognize yourself. And then you'll be a force to contend with. It is not safe to speak, and it never will be. But the thing you got to keep in mind is that it's even less safe not to speak, right? It's a balance of risks. It's like you want to pay the price for being who you are and stating your mode of being in the world, or do you want to pay the price for being a bloody serf, one that's enslaved him or herself? Well, that's a major price, man. That thing unfolds over decades, and you'll just be a miserable worm at the end of about 20 years of that, right? No self-respect, no power, no ability to voice your opinions, nothing left but resentment because everyone's against you, because of course you've never stood up for yourself. It's like, say what you think carefully, pay attention to your words. The price is, it's a price you want to pay if you are willing to believe that truth is the cornerstone of society, and in the most real sense. If you're willing to take that leap, then tell the truth and see what happens, and nothing better could possibly happen to you. There'll be ups and downs, and there'll be pushback, and there'll be controversy and all of that, but it doesn't matter. It's like, wake up, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. That's a start. You know 1,000 people. You're going to know more than that over the course of your life, but let's say 1,000 for the sake of argument for now. They know 1,000 people. That means that you're one person away from 1,000,000 people and 2 persons away from 1,000,000,000 people. And you're the center of that network. And now the way networks work is that information propagates in a network manner. So don't underestimate the power of your speech. So the people have an inchoate longing to have the sort of thing that we're talking about articulated. And so don't be thinking you're alone. It's just that people can't talk, they're afraid to talk, or they don't know what to say. And those are real problems. So if you're reasonably articulate, like, start talking and sharpen yourself up. I mean, the enemy is a cloud. They're a cloud of gnats. They're only courageous in groups. They're only courageous in mobs. If you stand your ground and don't apologize and articulate things properly, they'll disperse around you like they're not even there. So most of it's illusion. So don't be afraid, but be afraid of the right thing. And the right thing you should be afraid of is not saying what you say, because that's the same as not being. And here you are, suffering away. You might as well be at the same time. At least then there's something to you.
Where do you find the hope and the strength to continue to fight? Or for those who are listening, to get the motivation to stand up and say what's on their mind?
Well, people have to have a dialogue with their own conscience. You know, if you don't imagine that you get upset with something when you recognize an obstacle in your path, and then imagine that you need a path and that you've chosen reasonably wisely, let's say, not perfectly, but reasonably wisely. An obstacle arises, you're frustrated, disappointed, ashamed, afraid. Well, you have something to do to clear out the obstacle. You have something to say. Well, then you don't clear out the obstacle because you're afraid to speak, or you're unwilling to speak. You want to defer the conflict because you hope it will go away. Well, all that'll happen is that the obstacles will pile up. But then your life will be nothing but obstacles. Well, you need to know that. You have to ask yourself if you believe that's true. If it's true, then you don't want to remain silent. Imagine too that as you remain silent, you get smaller because you're not manifesting the courage necessary to live by your own standards. And the problem gets bigger. Well, if you're not going to speak now, what makes you think you're going to be more prepared in the future?
You won't.
Why is that going to happen? When does that ever happen?
Well, I can't believe we're talking about school. People who say, just stay quiet in school, just get the grade. That's paying
wrong.
them.
That's wrong. That's wrong.
Right. You're paying them. You don't have the courage when you're paying. When somebody's paying you and they're doing something at work and they want you to play along, you think you're going to have courage then? I mean, you've got to face it
I told
as
my
it
students
happens.
all the time to never write something they didn't believe to be true. And I know this as a psychologist too. You might think, I can get away with writing out something I don't believe for the grade and all, but there are studies of this sort of phenomenon. So imagine you have a viewpoint, and I measure that with a political attitudes questionnaire. Okay, maybe it's a viewpoint. What do we take? You're anti-immigration, just for the sake of argument. And then I ask you to write out a 500-word pro-immigration essay. And then a week later, I give you the political questionnaire again. Now, I'm going to bury it in a bunch of other questionnaires, so you don't know what I'm measuring. Okay, your belief has tilted way towards the argument that you've made, even though you don't know it. So, and it's because most of your beliefs are actually rather shallow in terms of their explicit formulation. You think you believe something, but it's pretty shallow. It's just an assumption. Now, you might act on it and all of that, but it's not well differentiated and articulated. Now, if you take one of your assumptions and you write a counterexample, you're going to articulate that. Well, then that's going to move you. And so if you think that you can write an essay that you don't believe and you'll remain unscathed by that, well, you're wrong. You won't. And if you do it 20 times, you will turn into what you wrote. That's what will happen. And it's an absolute sin in my estimation. I mean that specifically for anyone who attends university to write what they do not believe to be true. It's certainly a sin for anyone to encourage them to do that. Now, you can do that as an exercise. You can ask people to delineate out an argument that runs contrary to their viewpoint. That can be part of the reasonable process of learning.
Correct.
But that is not the same thing as doing it for deceptive purposes to manipulate your professor because you're too cowardly to formulate your arguments properly. I talked to two of Canada's most outstanding people in the last 2 weeks, Conrad Black, who ran a huge newspaper empire, and Rex Murphy, who's probably Canada's best known journalist personality, because he's both. He's a great journalist, but he's a personality as well. And they remembered their university education. Jocko Willink as well. He's not a Canadian, but he had the same kind of memory. They talked about their education in the humanities, mostly concentrating on English literature, and described it with tremendous fondness as a turning point in their life, as an opening up of the world of knowledge to their youthful eyes, right? Very, very fondly. Contrasted that with Yeonmi Park, who was an escapee from North Korea, very brave woman who was then enslaved in China, had a life that was just sheer hell, and spent a good part of the interview telling me how much better her life was than the lives of many people she knew. She wrote a book called In Order to Live, but the book stopped at the year 2015, so I asked her what she did. She went to Columbia, took a humanities degree, which was a dream of hers. After finishing her entire education in 1 year, her education prior to university.
Cow.
Right, exactly. Then she went to a South Korean university for 3 years. They're hard to get into. And then she went to Columbia. I said, what was it like going to Columbia? Taking a humanities degree from this escapee from totalitarianism who was once enslaved, got to go to one of America's august institutions and be trained in the humanities. Someone who'd been exposed to George Orwell and who was motivated to write because she read Animal Farm, understood the power of literature. She said it was a complete waste of time and money, and that she was afraid to say anything.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. It's a hell of a thing to hear when you're a university professor. What cures in therapy is truth. That's the curative. Now, there's exposure to the things you're afraid of and avoiding as well, but I would say that's a form of enacted truth, because if you know there's something you should do by your own set of rules and you're avoiding it, then you're enacting a lie. You're not telling one, but you're acting one out. It's the same damn thing. So if I can get you to face what it is that you're confronting that you know you shouldn't be avoiding, then what's happening is that we're both partaking in the process of attempting you to act out your deepest truth. And what happens is that improves people's lives.
and it improves them radically. And the evidence, the clinical evidence for that is overwhelming. We know that if you expose people to the things they're afraid of, but that they're avoiding, they get better. And you have to do it carefully and cautiously and with their own participation and all of that. But of all the things that clinicians have established that's credible, that's number one. And that's nested inside this deeper realization that the clinical experience is redemptive, let's say, because it's designed to address suffering, insofar as the people who are engaged in the process are both telling each other the truth.
So you've been an educator through the rise of the smartphone, and my question basically relates to procrastination and task delay, needless task delay specifically. And given the unprecedented level of distraction that we have in today's world, I just wanted to get your perspective from a psychological standpoint on, other than cleaning your damn room, what would you suggest to a student who's looking to overcome these things?
Well, I think with any, let's call it addictive process, I mean, email is powerfully addictive, right? Partly, it's a slot machine, and I mean that technically. So when you pull, that's a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, if I remember correctly. And it's very addictive because if you pull on the slot machine arm enough, you will win. And you never know which pull will reward you. And so not only is that addictive, it's very hard to extinguish that. And so emails like that, because there's always something beckoning, and now and then it's a jackpot. And social media is like that because, you know, people are posting interesting things. And so, well, how do you overcome an addictive process? And partly you do it by replacing it with something better, right? So when people study drug and alcohol use, they often make an elementary mistake, which is to try to figure out why people use drugs and alcohol. That's not a smart thing to wonder. We know why people use cocaine. Cocaine directly stimulates the systems that produce positive emotion. It's like, so there's no mystery there. The mystery with cocaine is very, very simple. Why don't people take cocaine all the time until they die? That's the mystery, really, because you can get isolated rats to do that. So, and for some people, alcohol has the same kind of effect, except it's mediated by opiates. But often what people have to do to get themselves out of an addictive process is to find something better to do to replace it. And so I would say the problem with the gadgets, and I mean, they're amazing things, is that they proximately interfere with medium to long-term goals, I would say. And so I think the first thing you have to do to bring them under control is figure out what it is that their use is interfering with. It has to be something important. So you think, well, I want to do something important. Well, what is that? Well, it could be personal. Maybe you want to have a relationship. You want to get married. You want to have kids. You want to have a career that's meaningful. You know, you want to have a life. You want to have an Abrahamic adventure and be the father of nations, let's say. Well, you can't be ratting away on your cell phone and doing that. And so I think part of it is to set your sights high and make a plan and figure out who you could be and see if obsessive utilization of smartphone fits into that vision of nobility. And it will, partly because they're unbelievably powerful communication devices, but so often it's for lack of something better to do, and it also interferes. It's really, really, really useful to know that people vote their damn temperament. It gives you more of an understanding, at least in principle, of those who sit on the other side of you on the political fence. And there's been recent newspaper articles, quite interesting. I tweeted a couple of them about this company in UK called Cambridge Analytics, and they're using the damn Big Five. They can extract out Big Five information from your Facebook likes. They've got a model of every single person in the United States Big Five personality, and they help Trump craft political messages right down to the level of apartment buildings to appeal to people based on their Big Five temperament. And that's all recent work. And so one of the things that's very interesting is we are teaching computers to understand us so fast you can't believe it. And we really do risk walking into an electronic world where you will only see what you want to see. I mean, obviously the marketers are trying to do that as fast as possible, right? They only want to send you ads that you're going to be interested in, because it's expensive and foolish to send you anything that will annoy you or that you'll ignore. And so the marketers are trying like mad to map who you are, even by watching your eyes. They're trying to figure out who you are so they can send you the right information. But the danger is that that'll happen, say, in the domain of news and broader information, increasing this tendency for people to be siloed in their exposure to the external world. It's a big, it's sort of like each of us is becoming a micro celebrity surrounded by electronic sycophants who do nothing but tell us exactly what we want to hear. It's a real problem. Karl Popper, a famous philosopher of science, said that one of the things that you should do, and this is akin to the Piagetian view, is you should always look for information that contradicts your current viewpoint. Now that's painful, right? Because who wants their axioms contradicted? It can take you apart. But it's the only way that you can ensure that you're learning at the same time that you're maintaining your stability. And that's another reason why it's really necessary to engage in dialogue with people that you do not agree with, because they're the ones who will tell you things that you don't know. It's of crucial importance in the maintenance of your own stability. The worst thing that can happen to a person, no, because there's many horrible things that can happen to a person, but one of the worst things that can happen is that you find yourself in a situation where no one is offering you corrective feedback anymore, because you rely on the corrective feedback provided by other people to keep yourself sane, to keep moving in the ever-changing environment. And if you cut yourself off from that feedback, then you end up static and shrinking. It's really not good. You get less and less competent, you get less and less confident, and the threats outside of you loom larger and larger. When I counsel my clinical clients who are depressed or anxious, one of the things I've always told them to do over the last few decades is to disconnect themselves from the news. This was before the social media.
And you still believe that today?
Well, I hadn't, see, you asked me about CNN earlier. Like, I haven't watched mainstream television news since like 1985.
You gotta be kidding.
No, I'm not kidding.
Let me get this straight. I want to hear you say this one more time. You haven't watched mainstream media since 1985?
No, very little. I didn't have a TV. I didn't have a TV since about 1985.
When's the last time you watched CNN?
Probably in an airport for a few minutes. I virtually never watch CNN.
So if I come to your place, I know you have some interesting collection of art that you collect, but if I come to your place, your TV's not going to be on CNN.
There's no TV.
There's no TV in your house?
I haven't had a TV since 1985. I realized back in 1985 that news wasn't news. If it was only news for a day, it wasn't important. So I read magazines. You know, I read Harper's, or I'm not at the moment, Harper's, Atlantic Monthly, The Economist. Those were my basic sources for news. Now that's changed, you see, because I got tangled up so badly in scandal 2 years ago that I've been on top of, especially social media, like an obsessed addict for 2 years, trying to manage it. You know, but it's not clear to me that that's been a good thing. For like, well, I've got to.
For your sanity, or for?
It's certainly. I don't think Twitter is a good thing for my sanity. Twitter is so contentious. It's so. I mean, if you want a daily dose of hate, you can get it in 10 minutes on Twitter. You know, if I post something, you know, there's a number of comments about whatever I posted, and 1 out of 4 of them is brutally rude and obnoxious, as nasty as it can possibly be. And that's very, very common. And like, you know, people are quite sensitive to negative information. We're more sensitive to negative information than we are to positive information. And I'm not complaining. I don't have to use Twitter. It's a completely voluntary choice. And I'm certainly a massive beneficiary of the existence of social media. So I'm not complaining about it. I don't have a right to complain about it. But it exists in absolute contrast to my experiences in the world. Like, it's not like I'm walking down the street and 1 person out of 4 jumps out of an alley and like curses me. I haven't had a single negative interaction with an individual, but I've had thousands of interactions with individual people on the street, let's say, in airports and so forth, in the last 6 months, and every single one of them has been overwhelmingly positive. So that's reality. Then I go into Twitter and it's like, oh my God, it's just brutal. There's no shortage of ridiculously positive things that are happening to me on an ongoing basis. I can't even believe it. But the same is true on the negative end. And so what's happened is the range of my emotional experience has expanded almost unbearably, I would say. So, and again, I'm not complaining about that because
Yeah.
I could choose to do it differently. But some of this has also been a matter of management. It's like, it is literally the case that although it's been a little better over the last 3 or 4 months, for about 18 months in a row, I was at the center of a scandal that could have taken me out at least twice a week. So constant, non-stop scandal of one form or another. And so that took a lot of juggling and management to see what was going on, and I was paying attention to social media and trying to figure out how to respond in the press and on YouTube and on my blog and all of these sorts of things, trying to learn how to do that. And so it's been an obsessive learning experience, let's say. YouTube has served me very, very well. My blog works out very well for me. The podcast, I have a podcast, it's very popular. That's worked out really well. Facebook, I don't pay much attention to Facebook, although I post on it. Twitter, that's something else. Twitter is,
Vicious,
I don't know
huh?
what to do with Twitter. I don't know what to do with Twitter. I think I go back and forth. I go back and forth. You know, there's a part of me that there's people I keep up with on Twitter, the people I follow, some of these IDW types, so to speak. You know, I see what Shapiro's posting, I see what Brett Weinstein's posting, and Sam Harris, and I kind of keep in the loop that way. And I feel a moral obligation to keep up. And I have 900,000 followers, and I feel an obligation to them too. But there's also this addictive curiosity, you know, that what's happening? And I tried to pull myself away from that on the TV news, because it's the same thing except in much less concentrated form. And it was good for me. And I do think if it's only important today, it's not important. I got together with the woman who was going to become my wife, Tammy. I mean, I've known her since we were 8, and she was a friend of mine when I was a kid, and so we've known each other forever. But we got together seriously when we were in our late 20s, and she was really ready to have a family, like now. And I didn't have a permanent job at that point, although my prospects were good, which is part of the reason she married me. But she wanted to start, and I thought, okay, so I didn't really want to do that. And I thought, okay, what's your problem, Jordan? What is it that you're worried about? And I thought, well, there's an economic issue. That's not really serious. I'll get a job, and she'll come along wherever I go if I have that job. So that's not an issue. It's like, so what then? Well, babies. What the hell do I know about babies? Nothing. I can't take care of a baby. I don't know how to do that. So I said to her, well, the reason I seem to be objecting is because I'm kind of doubtful about the infant stage. Like toddlers, I know what to do with them. I can play with kids. But when they're under a year, they're like a foreign object to me in many ways. I don't know what to do. And so that worries me. And so I'll tell you what, if you'll take primary care for the infant, I'll take care of you and the infant. And how would that be? And I think that's the right role. I really do believe that. And you might think, well, that's sexist. It's like, well, no, not necessarily. How are you so sure that that first year as a mother isn't one of the great parts of the fundamental adventure of being female? Like, so don't give me any crap about that being sexist. That's just, I don't think so. You know, and so what I would do is watch my wife, and if she got tired, spell her off. And I did what I could to take care of the infant, but I knew that, you know, she would take care of that while I stumbled around trying to learn how. And she did that. And that worked fine. And then, you know, as the kids got older, I took more and more responsibility for them. And when my daughter was about 2.5, I think that's right, 1.5, we had our second child. And then I took care of Michaela, the older child, quite a lot after that, because Tammy, of course, was busy, especially that first year with the infant, with Julian. But that worked well. That was a good division of labor as far as I was concerned. And also my wife was very happy about that, because she loved to take care of infants. And that's characteristic of a lot of women, you know, and even those that don't admit it. And it's too bad they don't admit it, because what, there's something wrong with that? Is there something? I saw this tweet the other day about this grandmother, mother of a mature daughter, and the daughter had announced that she was never going to have kids, and her mother said, oh, I think that's just great, you know, you're gonna just live for you, and that's just wonderful, and I'm glad you can be so independent. And I thought, how could you possibly say something that stupid to your daughter? It's like, you don't want grandchildren, and you're so sure that she's just not ideologically addled about
the fundamental realities and beauties and depth of life. It's like, how many things do? We have a career if we're lucky, or a job if we don't. If we're not, we have an intimate relationship, we have a family. That's life, man. You miss one of those, well, you can do it, but it's a big deal not to do that.
What would you say from your personal experience has been one of the most consistent issues that you see plaguing young men and holding them back from all your years of experience?
Well, one of them is wrong attitude towards education. And, because it's easy, and like I said, temperamentally, I was disinclined to enjoy school, especially from grade 7 through grade 12, especially
Why do you say
junior
that?
high. Well, all my friends were kind of delinquent types in some ways, and so they acted up, and so did I, and I was pretty mouthy. But also, it was too slow for me. Like when I took language arts in grade 8, I had read the whole year's books in I think it was the first day, but it was certainly the first week. And so it just bored, I was just bored to death. So that wasn't so good. And it can be a bit infantilizing because of the rule structure. Like I said, a lot of my friends, they just weren't going to put up their hand when they wanted to go to the bathroom anymore, and they were just done with that. But one of the things young men aren't taught properly, and I mean even at the age of, let's say 11, young, is like, there is nothing that will make you more powerful than your words. And so if you think that reading and writing is for pansies and dimwits, or teachers' pets, because they get in less trouble in school, let's say, you're seriously misinformed. And so, I talk to people like Jocko Willink, and Jocko's as tough a guy as you could ever hope to encounter about literacy, and a number of other people too who are also seriously tough guys. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, yeah, well, he's as tough as a bloody boot, that guy, and both those characters, and Rex Murphy, who's one of Canada's outstanding journalists, he's so damn tough, it's crazy. And they all know perfectly well that literacy is a huge part of what's made them unstoppable. And you don't take that lightly. It's really serious, and it's a failing of our education system that literacy isn't marketed properly to young men. It's like, straighten up, speak properly, write, learn to write. Why? Because that's the same as learning to think. And why should you think? Well, because you won't do as many stupid things, and your horizons will widen. And then too, when you need to entice people along your journey, hopefully somewhere good, you'll be able to do it because you'll be compelling. And there's something deeply pathological about the way our society markets literacy to young men in particular, because, well, partly we just won't allow for let's say the marketing association between toughness and dangerousness and literacy. There's something wrong about that, we think, some weird way, and that's wrong. It's like, sure, you should be physically tough, and you should be tough in your temperament, as well as having the capacity for play and compassion. That has to be developed too. But that's not enough. And I don't care how tough you are physically, you're nowhere near as tough as you would be if you were physically tough and really literate. And then you're an unstoppable force, and hopefully for good. And that's a much tougher battle than, being tough for your own idiotic, selfish ends. That's just pathetic. And I just don't understand. We've developed a writing program, which is called Essay, which teaches people how to write while they use it. It's a word process, but it teaches people how to write as you use it. We built that into the program itself. And I really want to market it to young men and say, look, get your words together and then see what you can do. And don't be thinking that that's somehow beneath you. That just means you're stupid that you think that. You don't know anything, you think that. It's wrong. And you're limiting yourself so much you can't even imagine it. You might not even figure it out till you're 60 and then it's too late. So read, write, think, write. That's what we need. You know, you think that the pleasures that wealth can bring you as a solitary and free individual outweigh the terrible, burdensome responsibility of a family. But if you're just thinking of that responsibility as burdensome, you're not thinking straight. It's like, no, you don't understand. That's a wonderful opportunity. That's what that is. And it comes at a cost, like all opportunity. And you see that too. One of the saddest things I saw fairly regularly as a clinician was, couples that had decided too late that they wanted to have kids, and then, were just turning themselves inside out with attempts to conceive, and often failing. And Jesus, that's hard to recover from once you realize that's what you want and it doesn't happen. So and the other thing that people don't really realize is that things go by pretty quick. That period of time when your kids are little, it seems like a long time when you think about it beforehand, and even sometimes when you're living through it, but it's gone, and you want to take advantage of that. And I had a great career, and I still do, but I can't say that it was more important to me, like existentially, than my family. Like I couldn't have possibly imagined having a career that was more, what would you say? It offered me everything I could have possibly wanted. Also a lot of trouble, but nonetheless, and so I was exceptionally fortunate in that regard. But nonetheless, if I had to pick, I picked my family. Yeah, because of the quality of the experience, that I'm not just saying that out of a sense of obligation or duty. It's like, no, fundamentally that was deeper. And I tried to teach the deepest things I could conceptualize, and succeeded in that, at least to the degree that I could conceptualize them. But still, it's like, no, when push comes to shove. Especially those years I spent with Tammy in Boston when our kids were little. It's like, man, there is something to that. Don't miss it. Stupid guys, don't miss that.